Welcome very much. Welcome. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming and joining us today. I'm not going to talk because nobody here wants to hear me talk. I'm just going to turn things over to Karina, who has graciously agreed to moderate us today.
All right, everyone, thank you so much for taking the time to come out to this panel. I know I'm personally really excited to hear from these wonderful alums that Kelly has put together. I'm just going to jump into introductions, starting with Tim. So Tim Chevalier graduated from Wellesley in 2001 with a computer science major and math minor. He did graduate work in computer science at UC Berkeley, receiving a Master's of Science in 2004, and at Portland State University studying functional programming and compiler verification. Most recently, he worked on the Rust language team at Mozilla, on HTTP routing at Heroku, and at site reliability engineering on App Engine at Google. His writing has been published in Model View Culture, in The Advocate, on the Geek Feminism blog, and in the Proceedings of the International Conference on Functional Programming. He is currently studying to become a nurse. So Tim, I have one question for you.
Yeah.
How did you get from graduating from Wellesley to working at Google?
Well, I realize this is a question with a long answer, and it's ending up being the intro, so I'll try not to take up all the time. I was rejected from Google a couple times before I eventually got a job there. After Wellesley, I wanted to become a CS professor because I had great teachers here, and I wanted to be like them. So I went to grad school at Berkeley. That didn't work out. I'll save the details for later if someone wants to know about grad school. And I was living in the Bay Area, so it was easiest to stay there. So I got a couple different software engineering jobs at companies you probably haven't heard of, some of which are now defunct. And I got tired of working for the man, and I decided to go back to grad school at Portland State. I was able to stay there for 4 years, but I left because of sexual harassment and got the job at Mozilla that Karina mentioned in my intro, working on the Rust language. And had a couple other jobs since then, and in 2015, I was pretty much done with the tech industry. I was ready to quit. Again, reasons I'll talk about later if people are interested, but after a couple months of time off, I came to the conclusion that I had student loans, not from Wellesley, but from grad school later on, and there was no way I could pay them off without working in the tech industry, without cutting a deal with the devil for a little bit longer. So at about that time, a Google recruiter emailed me, and I said, okay, I'll give you a chance again this time, even though you rejected me before. And kind of to my surprise, I got the job. And as to what happened next, I think I'll save that for after everyone's done their intro.
Great, thank you so much. Next up is Stephanie Contreras. Stephanie is from Los Angeles, California, and graduated from Wellesley in May 2016. After graduating, she interned at Creative Artists Agency, a talent agency in Century City, California, where she first learned AngularJS in front-end development and agile environments. A few months after her internship ended, she accepted a job with Fidelity Investments in Durham, North Carolina, as an associate software engineer. Now she is on the net benefits team and works on the stock plan summary page where she leads the team in front-end development. The languages and tools she uses on a daily basis are Angular, Git, Node.js, Jenkins, Stash, and Jira. So Stephanie, thank you so much for taking the time to come here. Now that you're 2 years out of college and have been working at one company for more than a year, what are some things that have surprised you about your work and the working post-grad life?
Yeah, so one thing that really surprised me once I got into the work environment was how fast I was able to pick everything up. So I went through this LEAP program at Fidelity Investments, and I got placed in the front-end development side of things, and I just was able to kind of just lead a team, like a little Scrum team, very well. And then I got placed in the stock plan services, where now we actually lost our tech lead, so I had to kind of just take up that role as well, just do the development, but also talk to the business owners and the UXD team and tell them what we need from them and vice versa. So I think what really surprised me was how I just graduated like in 2016 and how I was able to pick up some of those roles really quickly. And, yeah.
Great, thank you so much. Next up is Frances Lee. Frances Lee graduated from Wellesley College in 2000 as a computer science major, gathering nearly 20 years of full-time experience as a developer, technical lead, and manager, with the majority of her career spent in the financial sector. Frances Lee has been a vice president in global banking and markets technology at Bank of America since April 2017. In just over a year spent at Bank of America, Frances has successfully delivered on high-profile projects such as MIFID 2 onboarding.
MIFID too.
Oh, sorry. MIFID.
MIFID, yeah.
MIFID 2 onboarding. She currently serves as a technical lead developer in CIRRUS, the global regulatory transactions reporting platform for OTC derivatives AMP FX. Prior to joining Bank of America, Frances worked in prime brokerage risk technology at Goldman Sachs from 2010 to 2017. During her tenure at GS, Frances worked on the NT margin decommissioning effort, rewriting the FINRA 4210 regulation risk calculators in SecDB for Goldman's prime brokerage, private wealth management, and institutional businesses. Her role expanded to managing the regulatory margin risk team, which included futures, margin, and derivatives clearing services. Before Goldman Sachs, Frances was a Java developer in FX front office technology at Citigroup, concentrating on the Citi FX benchmark and chief dealer platforms. Her technology experience outside the financial industry includes IT consulting at Novantis and nonprofit organizations such as DonorsChoose.org. Frances, thank you so much for being here. Can you speak to some of the significant career jumps that you've made in the course of your career? Why did you make them, and as someone who is looking at career jumps in the future, what made them feel quote unquote right?
Oh man. Yeah, 18 years is a long time, by the way, so I had to think really hard just to figure out how to respond. So I guess the best way to respond is to just go over my background story. So I, as you heard, that I was an IT consultant developer coming out of college. And, you know, my interest at the time was to just get the exposure to the different types of projects and, you know, different industries at the time to travel. So I did that for 4 years. And then I decided, yeah, I'm done with traveling, and I needed to get more experience, at a substantial firm, maybe like a Wall Street firm. Since it's New York, if you're working in New York and IT, it's like you have to have at some point work on a Wall Street firm. So that's what I looked for. I had a contact at Citigroup, from high school, asking about the opportunities that are there, and that's how I got my first opportunity in Wall Street. It was interesting. Citigroup is really big. It's like 270,000 people. So, you know, talking about bureaucracy, it doesn't get any bigger than that. There were some ups and downs in there. And including some of those like boys club type of atmospheres that I experienced while I was there. So, I try to hang on, try to adjust, but 4 years after working Citigroup, I thought maybe, let me try to see what it's like working in a different environment. So I went from Wall Street to nonprofit, which was a 180-degree swing. So I joined DonorsChoose.org, which I thought was a good cause, to built the back-end systems there to support like educational projects in the U.S. I thought it was a good cause, and I spent it. And it was also a better work-life balance for me that I needed. I needed a break from Wall Street. Get like more time off, more flexible hours. I thought, yeah, it was really great. But then at that point, like after 1 or 2 years, things got stale. Like I felt like my career was stagnating. Basically because while, the work the project was great. It was just doing the same thing over and over again. And I think at that point I was already 10 years out of college, thinking I think it's time to pursue like career advancement. So I left DonorsChoose, and I was hesitant to go back into the financial firms, like particularly because of my experience at Citigroup. Like I thought, the boys club atmosphere was there, and I didn't really, I really didn't feel like I could progress. But then I was recruited by Women in Technology at Goldman Sachs. They were looking to hire, increase diversity, among their employee workforce. So not just for like women, but also like minorities as well. So I got recruited by Goldman Sachs, and I expressed my concerns during my interview a lot. It's like, I had this experience at Citigroup. I'm not sure, is it going to be any different here? And it was a genuine concern, because if I'm going to succeed, I need to have the support network in place. So I spoke to many of the team members, like the team members that I was going to potentially work with, and asked them about like what is it like comparing Goldman Sachs to Citigroup, and they convinced me. They were like, it's like night and day. Like when they talk about like career development, they really meant career development. They not only preached it but also practice it. So I took the job, and like from then on, my career took off. I had all the support network in place. I was set up with a mentor. I had like a lot of team members like I can go leverage for my questions. It was also out of necessity because up until Goldman Sachs, I was programming in Java. But when I took the position in risk, I had to basically like let go of Java, learn a completely new language called slang to work in SecDB, like nowhere. And there's nowhere to find a book at Barnes and Nobles to prep for this. So it was a huge learning curve. And from that, in order to survive, I had to leverage, my team members, ask lots of questions, and from that culture allowed me to thrive. It allowed me to succeed. So
Great.
yes,
Yeah.
I'll probably put it. I'll answer more later about that.
For sure. Thank you so much. And last but certainly not least, we have Callie Stenson. Callie is a recent Wellesley alum from Ada, Oklahoma. She grew up in a small town with some large dreams in a low-income family. After graduating from Oklahoma School of Science and Mathematics, a free public boarding school, she knew that she wanted to study computer science at a women's college. During Wellesley, Callie worked with Lynn on MIT App Inventor, interned at Next Thought, an ed tech startup in Norman, Oklahoma, built a visual debugger as a Google intern on the Pencil Code ed tech team, went to Jakarta as an Albright Fellow to explore the distance learning in developing country and online learning as it applies to other cultures, and finally ended up as an engineering resident at Google after graduating in May 2017. At Google, Callie realized her potential as an engineer was limited by the second-class program herself and other minorities had found themselves in. After 10 months of imparting feedback upon managers, HR, and VPs, she left to join edX and returned to her passions of making positive changes in ed tech, open source technology, and the nonprofit world. So thank you so much, Callie, for not only being here, but putting this panel together. One question for you. What made you choose the Google Engineering Residency as your first job after Wellesley?
It's a really great question, especially with that intro I wrote. I had a lot of conversations and reflection on like what I wanted my first job out of college to be. And initially I thought that I wanted a more full-time role at Google, and that is what I applied for, and was initially kind of like put through this process where I was rejected from that role, and they were like, hey, there's this other role that you could apply for, and I was like confused, but okay, fine, and then did another interview and had sort of given up and was like, I'm gonna go work for a startup somewhere else, or I'll find a different job, it'll be fine. And was offered that other job and had some conversations with other alums, some really cool friends of mine back then who were people of color, and other friends who were like, hey, like this program at Google is probably pretty racist and pretty sexist. I don't think you should do it. And I thought, well, it's just a year, like it's a job, it's still a lot of money, like it would be great to just have a job. And so I took it anyway, but those friends of mine who went to other places and got jobs at their places and earned a lot more money at those other places were right. And so I think that like they were like, hey, no, you should go interview at Microsoft, you should interview at these other places. And I thought like, no, Google's just amazing. Like I really want to work there. And I don't work there anymore.
Great, thank you so much. So we want the next 39 minutes to be conversational and casual. And so I'm just going to open the floor up to any questions that the audience members have. I think some of the panelists alluded to different interactions or personal experiences with diversity, inclusion efforts and issues, but I can say that all of our panelists have something to say. And so I'm just going to open up the floor for anyone who has questions.
I will try to break the silence. So, if somebody from the old friends finds you and asks you for one bit of wisdom, the things you've learned, what would you say that you should, this other person should think about or do from your experience so far?
I have some notes on this.
I don't know if you want to be more specific about experience so far, but I guess some things that I picked up is I have a very diplomatic friend who's married to a Wellesley alum who went to Harvard, who worked with me on a lot of the advocacy that I did at Google, and he was much more diplomatic than me. I think that I was angry and I yelled a lot, and sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. So I think that I would tell people to work really hard on like when they should be diplomatic and when they should be angry, and to know when anger is useful and when anger is best kept inside yourself.
That's a soft skill, right? Yeah.
Well, I would say that I would tell somebody, as long as they were in a minoritized group in tech, which if you're a woman, you are, that for one thing, your presence there is political. So even if you don't want to be political, don't want to engage in political activity within your workplace, you kind of don't have a choice about that, because to not be political yourself is to be politicized by others, to be an object rather than a subject. So it's a really difficult personal choice how much of an activist to be, but be aware that your presence will never be apolitical, because mediocre men are scared of losing their jobs, and some of them will do everything possible to drive out everybody who's not a white, cis, heterosexual man out of the company. And that's going to happen, and it's not your fault. And that's kind of the message I would drive home, that this is not your fault. It's not about you. You are better than them, and that's why they're scared of you.
I probably have a different perspective because of, I guess, my career progression. I always think of like diversity as being like I have the unique set of skills that I can always bring to the table. I can always add something to the team that no one else can do. So I don't know. I'm sure my perspective is a lot different, but I always try to put a positive spin. Like I use my unique personality to my advantage, and to try to sell myself as someone who can be part of the solution instead of someone who's complaining about all the problems that we see out there. So that's been my perspective. That's helped me survive this long.
So if I'm thinking of like, if I was sitting out there, what could I have said to kind of help me? And I think one of the things is I know this might sound cliche, but really believe in yourself and find out who you are and the kind of engineer that you want to be, if you want to be an engineer, or if you want to go to grad school, figure out the kind of, role that you want to take on yourself. I know that, like, I've told my peers I wasn't always at the top of my class. Like, I was not, I didn't get straight A's, or I don't know if we can get like straight A's, but I mean, if you are, amazing. But I know, like, in my classes, I would have C's, and as long as I would go back and look at all the mistakes that I made and all the pieces that I might not have completed, as long as I can go through them and learn and just get better, I think that really helped me. And as an individual, kind of just be confident, especially going into the workforce, that, yeah, when you're starting your job or starting anywhere you're going to be, it's going to be tough, but once you get it, you're going to grow exponentially. And like,
I can piggyback off of that. Yeah, I didn't consider myself a straight A student at all, but what I concentrated on was just learning the material. So if you're worried about grades, like not getting a 4.0 in computer science in the class, don't worry about that. Don't stress about it. It's more important to learn the material that you learn, because it's going to get harder once you leave school. It's not going to be a competition just within the people in Wellesley. You're going to be up against competition from people from all the world, competing for a select few spots.
And I would add, after your first job, nobody cares anymore what your grades were in college. Yeah, exactly. It may not even matter for your first job. Some companies like Google will ask you for a transcript. So it may matter that one time, but after that, nobody cares. It's your experience that matters. So I really agree with both Francis and Stephanie that sometimes you learn a lot more from classes where you got a C or a B minus than ones where you got an A, because the ones where you got an A were probably easy for you, and what you learned from is struggling with something that doesn't come easy.
Great. So I'd like to turn and sort of ground this conversation in your guys' personal experiences. So I'll start with Tim. In case the audience members were unaware, Tim sued Google for discrimination, harassment, retaliation, and wrongful termination in the fallout of the infamous Demore memo. So Tim, could you talk a little bit more about your experience during that time?
Yeah, definitely. So when I joined Google, which was at the end of 2015, I sort of vowed to kind of keep my head down and do my job. I didn't want to get involved in diversity activism or advocacy there, because for one thing, I feel like it's their job. I mean, ultimately, diversity and inclusion make a company better. If you're hiring people because they're the best and not because they're white men, you're going to get better people and you're going to do better work. So why should I do free work that I'm not getting compensated any extra for? So that was my attitude coming in. So November 2015, that was how I saw it, and that's pretty much what I did. But a year later, Donald Trump got elected, and that emboldened many of the semi-closeted racists and misogynists working at Google to be more active. I mean, just as when you read about the hate crimes that have happened since the election and how many of them have mentioned Donald Trump's name, it was pretty much the same thing at Google. Suddenly there was this outcry about how conservative white men were the real victims, how they were uncomfortable sharing their views at Google, which really meant their views about how the rest of us were subhuman. And this small group was pretty effective at seizing the narrative. So one thing they did was weaponize HR against people in minoritized groups to make claims that speech that was talking about racism honestly and was talking about sexism honestly was actually discriminatory against white men. And kind of unbelievably, this worked, even though Google, the vast majority of Googlers are white and the vast majority of Google engineers are male. Somehow, somebody believed that white men are an oppressed group at Google. So I was fired for making comments that discriminated against white men. So I didn't think this was right. And I knew it was part of this culture war that's going on for the soul of tech companies, that's sort of starting with sort of the most influential companies, or the ones that are seen that way, like Google, Facebook, and Twitter. You may have seen news articles about all three companies, about groups of aggrieved white men who are creating a narrative that conservative white men are oppressed, working at these companies. So it's part of a larger pattern, and that's why I wanted to file my lawsuit, to show that it's not just me, to get a conversation started about really bad faith, arguing in politics as applied to tech companies. Because if you want power, trying to get control of Google is a great way to go. Trying to push out people in minoritized groups, trying to rise in the ranks yourself as a manager so you can proceed to only hire white men, like that's the plan. And I think exposing it is really important.
Thank you so much. And staying on the topic of Google, Callie, at what point did you know you needed to leave Google?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think I had a conversation with my manager who wasn't directly associated with engineering residency because you do these rotations. So I was on the Google for Nonprofits team, which is a really cool team at Google. It's super under-resourced because Google only, well, that's a different comment. I won't make it. But so I liked my manager, and he saw me struggling with the diversity issues, and he said, "Can you still work here?" And I thought, I'm not sure. And I think that's when I realized I needed to figure that out. And I spent a lot of time applying to jobs. It was like my moment whenever I couldn't deal with my job anymore. I just started applying to jobs. And I think that's when I realized I needed to leave Google. It was a coping mechanism. You know, you apply to jobs on Indeed you've never heard of and to companies that you have no idea about. And you can start to tell people about companies and weird things and weird startups that exist. And you know a random list of them in your head because you've applied to all of them. And I think that's when I knew I needed to leave Google, when I couldn't go to work anymore.
Thank you. In turning to Stephanie, how has being a Latina shaped your view of the tech industry?
Yeah, so honestly, I'm the only Latina on my floor. I don't see any just Latinos in general, but I also found myself being the only Latina in some CS classes at Wellesley too. So I was already prepared that I was going to be the only Latina. So going into work and finding out, yeah, once again, I'm the only Latina, it just kind of tells me that there's something more that probably I should do or kind of work on. And I know that recently I've kind of just been thinking about educating more or just taking everything I've learned and all of my experience back home and really just start doing some more work in my community and sharing my passion for technology, telling students about, you know, software engineering and all the amazing things all the amazing opportunities out there. So I think, you know, it's just a role that I've kind of just want to take up on myself and just I feel like we just need more Latinos in general, just in technology.
Yeah, for sure. And Francis, can you speak to some of the largest challenges you've faced as you've moved into upper management, especially as a woman of color?
Oh, wow. The fact that there weren't many that I could look up to. I think gaining, credibility was an issue. But that's not like because I came from Wellesley. It was just because it's more about being female. And even today, like I think a few months back, Callie, you might remember this, but so
Yeah, please tell this story. It's a great story.
It's a great story. You know Quora and stuff, right? You asked all the questions. So there was one question that I responded to in Quora, where I was talking about like my experience, in school as a start, that I programmed in Java. I didn't use any fancy IDEs other than like Emacs or VI. And then I got this response off of my reply saying, I'm not sure I believe you, but from the look of your picture, it looks like you've never coded a line at all. And that, and that kind of irked me for a bit. It could be like almost 20 years. Of course I've coded. So instead of, I could have lashed out. I could have lashed back. But I decided to just like tell that person off. Be like, well, I've worked in 20 years. First of all, I'm glad you think I'm like 18. So you know, sometimes you can't tell how old Asian women are. By the way, I just turned 40 this year, so yeah. And I just told them, you know, I just basically explained like how things work in the financial industry with the rankings. What does it mean to be a vice president? I mean, he clearly thought, based on my title, that I was on the board of directors. That I was basically Brian Moynihan, the CEO of Bank of America, which is not the case. So to explain, just basically school him on like how the rankings work, and then like just tell him like, you could take a look at my resume on LinkedIn. You will see almost 20 years of experience. So you know, if you don't think I haven't coded a line of code, you know, you're wrong.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Again, if anyone has any questions or anything, yeah.
I was wondering what strategies you might use to overcome imposter syndrome.
Yeah, I'm just going to repeat the question so that it can be on the live stream. The question was strategies for overcoming imposter syndrome.
I have one. I have a lot of ideas, actually. I wrote a blog post about this and did a podcast interview about it a while ago. But my favorite point about imposter syndrome comes from a blog post by Lee Honeywell, where she says, you know, we call it imposter syndrome, but we're not sick. The real sickness is an industry that calls itself a meritocracy over and over, but fails to actually reward merit. So it doesn't fix the problem. Intellectualizing doesn't change feelings, but I think it is helpful to remind yourself that it is reasonable to feel like an imposter when people are making you feel like an imposter. And the term imposter syndrome, as Lee wrote about, kind of locates the problem within you. And it can be helpful to have a name for it, but it can also make you feel like you're the problem. And I think remembering that you're not the problem, other people who are threatened and scared that are causing you to feel this way are the problem. And I think once you become aware of that, it becomes sort of easier to detach yourself from those judgments. But I also think it's important to be compassionate to yourself and know that, you know, it makes you a human being to care what other people think about you.
I also have an answer for that. I cry a lot. I'm actually probably going to cry on this panel at some point. I will try not to, but I might. Most of my professors have seen me cry. The Protestant chaplain is sitting back there. She's seen me cry a lot. So I wrote a README about myself. My whole team has done this. And in my README, I talk about how I have tears as a biological response. And I just like divorce them from myself. I'm like, this is biology. This is me. And I cry a lot. And I think that was helpful. It was interesting to think about like myself and like facts and like just how things work, right? And I also sometimes will state my accomplishments, right? So if you think about like the things that you've achieved and how important those are, right? And that they matter, and like who you are, and like that being different from like what the world sees you as, right? So yeah.
I think it's more about building confidence, and I can speak from both sides because as somebody who initially felt like who was inadequate, not coming from an engineering school, felt I had to like sort of keep up, do a lot of homework, just to stay in the ball game with the other engineers, but as I gone through my career, I realized there were other skills that I have that not many of the engineers or the developers had with me. And I decided, hey, you know, I have these unique skills that I should leverage to my advantage. I have these soft skills that I get along with different teams, that are not necessarily technical, business. I get along. I'm a team player. And I can also contribute. I'm a strong developer. So that, like, thinking about the things that you are good at really helps build your confidence. And I think, like, even if you don't have to be perfect, but and this is like a model that comes from mentoring. Like I'm a Girls Who Code mentor, and what we preach there is like you don't have to be perfect, just be brave. and that's what you have to do. You just have to be proactive. You have to be brave. You're not gonna be like the ace student, like in your firm, but maybe don't be afraid to take risks. Sometimes they work out. Sometimes they will get you noticed, and those are the kind of things that will help you progress in your career.
Yeah, thank you so much. Does anyone else have any questions here and then there?
First of all, I just want to thank you guys for not only being here, but paving the path for everyone who comes after you and who will follow in your footsteps. Coming from Wellesley, how do you think that the community at Wellesley has shaped you or given you confidence and capabilities in the workforce, since it's not always the same once you leave?
Right, so the question sort of surrounding how the Wellesley community has shaped you guys to be ready for the workforce, also recognizing that the workforce is very different from the Wellesley community.
Yeah, so the Wellesley community, alum community, is like also the reason for this panel, right? So he asked if it was my brainchild. And it's only kind of my brainchild. It's also Sonali Sastri's brainchild, and Aaron Davis's brainchild, and the brainchild of many other alums that I could mention by name. And I think that that's really important to note, and to realize that like the people that you are meeting now and the friends that you have in classes now, and even the alums' names that are whispered, right, are like people who already want to know you and like already want to spend time with you. And there are all these like underground Facebook groups that you also get propelled off into when you graduate, and like random strangers on the internet that like want to talk to you just because you went to Wellesley and give you advice. So I think that like that network holds you and like gives you a place to like go get jobs and network and like be a part of this thing that like doesn't even really have a real name, because we're just doing it. Like this is just like community of people who are mostly women, and they're just trying to support each other and change the world.
Yeah, so often I found myself having a hard time doing like problem sets and collaborating with other people, and I think here in the CS department you are kind of forced to match up with somebody and work together, and I think it really helped me, especially I'm very shy, so just kind of come out of my shell. And then when I get put into an agile team where we're meeting everyday meetings and with all kinds of people, with non-technical people, that you have to explain what you're doing in a different way. So I think just talking with my peers here, that's really going to help you for things, your future stuff. So I think collaborating. Thank you guys for forcing us.
Great. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I had a different experience. When I was a computer science student, the classes mostly weren't really collaborative, but and also like I have some wonderful friends from Wellesley who I'm still in touch with, but there's almost no overlap between them and CS majors, so that group has had not much to do with my career. But I think the thing that was really, that I'll always keep and take with me from Wellesley was having had the chance to spend 4 years, actually 6 years, because I started taking classes here when I was 14. It's a long story. Having that time when, no one was looking at me and based on what they perceived my gender to be, treating me like I shouldn't be there. I came to Wellesley out of homeschooling, so it's kind of weird. It's like I had this sort of setup for the first 20 years of my life where I was free from a lot of overt discrimination, and I took it for granted, of course. As soon as I went to Berkeley for grad school, I learned how different it could be, but that chance to sort of build foundational skills in an environment that was pretty safe psychologically, that was incredibly valuable.
I think for me, being at Wellesley just made me more mindful of like how much diversity can contribute to success. So what I mean by that is like, and not only to like the overall team success, but like my own personal success in my career. And from like in here, I've had to learn with different groups of people how to deal with, develop my soft skills to talk to and connect with different groups that have different diversity in thought. So that had allowed me to like transition into the real world where like they're still trying to teach this today, believe it or not. But coming from Wellesley, it's just like, it just comes out like nothing. And yeah.
Yeah. And then did you have a question?
Yeah. If you find yourself in a situation where you realize over and over you've proved yourself equal or better, and you're still put in a subordinate role, you're still not recognized, you're still seen as like not as good, do you just leave, or what do you do?
Yeah, good question. So the question was surrounding a situation where you are proving yourself on a regular basis to be equal or better than someone who is in a superior role, and you're consistently put in a subordinate role. So what do you do? Do you leave, or are there other courses of action?
I would say find a place where you can fly, because that's kind of what I'm looking at. Recently, like I mentioned earlier, we lost our tech lead, and I was just starting on the team, so I had to pick up all these roles. And I was still an associate software engineer. I was still getting, I had to submit my hourly timesheets every week. And I felt like it wasn't being recognized a bit, which is okay. I don't mind it because I'm still learning. Like, I learned what it would take to be a dev lead, and everything that it will require is not just coding. Obviously, like, once you start leading and talking to multiple groups of team, like, your day-to-day just changes. And so I feel now that, okay, I can do a lot more better, and I'm kind of just looking for a place. Although there's just so many factors that comes into that too. I would also say don't give up, just make your voice heard as well if you really want to make it work there. So that would be my piece of advice.
I think strategically what I've done is try to figure out who are the decision makers in your group, right? Who needs to have visibility in the projects that you're working on, and whether or not you're doing a good job. Do they know anything about it? If they don't, you have to find a way to increase your visibility to those managers, so that way that your work can be recognized. Now, sometimes it could be like just informal networking, or maybe knocking on a door for a managing director, be like, hey, guess what I'm working on? I'm doing this, so that you want to make them aware of the projects that you're working on, so that when it's done and it's done successfully, they know, okay, this person was part of that, and that will help you increase visibility. And it also helps you it also puts you on the short list, short nominee list of people that they can count on. That's worked for me. That's worked for me over the years, and it's a skill. It's a skill that takes time to learn, but you can perfect it. And then once you get good at it, then you should have the recognition. You'll start getting the recognition that you deserve.
I would say Frances' advice is great for sort of finding the people who are going to be your allies and identifying the people who will see you. But if that doesn't work, I want to say, not being seen is really exhausting, and it's traumatizing, and it's really valid to leave that situation, because there are other places, maybe other industries in some cases, but you do deserve better, and there are places that will value you. And I think trying to convince or persuade people of your worth is counterproductive, because if they've already decided that you are not a source of facts or truth, then you saying that you're good won't convince them, because they've made up their minds already.
The only thing I would add is that if you have the energy to give feedback and fight back, that you should. But if you don't have the energy to give feedback and fight back, then you shouldn't. Yeah,
good advice. Shifting now to sort of what we as individuals can do in the tech industry to foster a more inclusive environment. Can you guys speak to sort of what companies can do, individuals and companies can do to foster a more inclusive environment, and also thinking about this in the context of the Wellesley Computer Science Department.
I think once you are in industry, the only way to go is organizing. You know, the only way that workers have ever changed any organization that they work for is by forming a labor union. And unions are not common in tech right now, but it's time for that to change. You have very little power as an individual, but if you organize together with your fellow workers, you have a lot of power, because without you, the company has nothing. So, you know, the boss needs you, but you don't need the boss.
So one thing I've observed is that big tech companies are commodifying people who go to women's colleges and historically black institutions and Hispanic serving institutions because they value diversity in terms of what it gains them with social capital, but they don't necessarily value paying people who are diverse people. So these tech companies that want to hire you and then pay you less. So you should be careful about what it means when they're coming here to talk to you. And then when Wellesley is the best women's college in the country, what does it mean when Wellesley becomes a target? So I think there's a lot to think about there in terms of Wellesley's position in this discussion and Wellesley's position as in interactions as a tension with these companies and their diversity initiatives, because it's really easy for them to just walk onto a women's college and say, hey, diversity recruiting, we did it, we're done. And no one's really thinking about the more complex systems and structures that go with that, and then all the other things and problems they have to solve. And then when we show up and we start complaining about being paid less, they really don't like that, and they just tell us to leave. So I don't have a real answer to this question, but I have thoughts, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. Does anyone have any final questions? If not, I have one more question. Okay, so final question is sort of directed at all of our student searches for internships and jobs. I know for me, a large part of my job search is gauging companies and teams on how inclusive they will be, and we all know that you don't really know until you are there and you're living the experience. But do any of you all have words of advice or specific questions that one could ask a manager or a recruiter while interviewing to be able to gauge what their experience would be like?
Yeah, I think one of the most important questions you can ask anybody interviewing you is, tell me something you've done wrong, whether as an individual, as a team, as a company. Tell me a mistake you've made. If they are not willing to admit to having done anything wrong, that's a good sign that you should run away, because the way that toxic masculinity works is assuming omniscience, and that's, not admitting wrongdoing is just a really great warning sign, because everybody has made a mistake. They have made a mistake, and if they won't tell you about one, if they can't find one that's innocent and not non-confidential enough to tell you, that's not going to be a safe person to work for, because you're not going to be able to ask questions safely.
To add on to that, ask them how many women are on their team. And if they won't answer you, run. Also, if they don't have any women on their team, ask them why there aren't any women on their team. And if they don't have a good answer for that question, run. I also think that if... I work on a team right now with all men, so I don't think that you shouldn't work on teams without women, to be clear. I don't know if any of my teammates are watching, but they're great. So you can work on teams with all men. I don't mean that you shouldn't. I also think that you should know a lot about market value for jobs. And I say that not because I think that money is the only thing that matters, but I do think that the wage gap matters. So you should think a lot about negotiating and recognize that the first offer that some company gives you is a low offer, and that you should be willing to walk away and negotiate if you want to be treated fairly. And just taking whatever offer is given to you initially probably allows discrimination to continue.
Yeah, to add on to the money part, for some of us, I came from a low-income background. Any amount of money that you get paid at a tech job coming out of school seems like a lot. But remember that money is how companies express their love for you. They don't really love you, but to the extent that they show how much they value you, it's through how much money they're paying you. It doesn't matter what words they say to you. It's about money. So even if you don't think you need more money, when you ask for more money and they agree, you have asked them to make a decision that they value you, and they're going to act like they value you. And and remember that it's very little money to them. What seems like a lot of money to you, especially if you're from a low-income background like me, is nothing to that company, to Google. It's, the cost of running a data center for 10 seconds.
Yeah, I mean, I would actually say one thing is, like, see if you can fall in love with that position. Like, is it going to challenge you every day? Are you going to be learning new things? Are you going to be getting better and better? Sometimes salary, lowballing, okay, come on, like, yeah. I would say negotiate, but sometimes like a very high salary doesn't mean much if you're not going to grow. And if they're going to just want you to be quiet and just work,
All I have to say is, first of all, know your worth, do the research, see how other people in the same industry, in the field, how much they are earning. And then, as opposed, in terms of working, finding out what the work environment is like, I try to talk to as many people on the potential team that I might be on as I can. And I think at like places like Bank of America, Goldman Sachs, like Citigroup, they have many people talk to you anyway. So you will, through the interview process, you're gonna be able to tell, like, what is it like working with certain team members and the team overall. So that's been my experience there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think we are out of time, but can we just give a round of applause to our panel?